Nate McCabe, A Great Generation. Nate McCabe.
Thank you. Tom Brokaw wrote a book a few years ago called The Greatest Generation. And that book was about the men and women in this country that fought in World War II. Americans are infatuated with superiority, calling things greatest of all time and that sort of thing. And that infatuation is a poison. It is a poison to feel you are superior to others because you cannot learn from them. You cannot learn of them. And we've been living with the poison brought by the Europeans on this continent 400 years ago. 1 year before the Mayflower landed, when slavery was introduced into Virginia. And for the next 150 years, those Europeans used their superior thinking to create a very flawed system for controlling their slaves. They created bizarre laws that led to bizarre consequences. They treated slaves worse than they would treat the family dog or a horse. And finally, in 1776, we have this document that's written by our esteemed forefathers that says, all men are created equal. Now notice it's all men are created equal and not all people, because women were still not created equal in 1776. And I'm reminded of when I was dating my wife. She worked at a hospital. I'd call the hospital, and occasionally I'd get the message machine. And the message machine would talk about the services of the hospital for children, women, and adults. And I thought, it's been 200 years since the Declaration of Independence, and we still don't have women as adults. It takes a long time to get rid of the bad thinking that leads to the bad actions over generations. But the Declaration of Independence, as high-minded as it was completely thrown away when the Constitution was written. Because slavery was instilled in the Constitution. It was thought that Virginia and South Carolina would not approve it if slavery was not included, and so it was. And so for many more years, we continued with this bad actions based on bad thinking to oppress people who we could not possibly know. We looked down on them. They could not read because we would not teach them to read. They could not write because we could not teach them to write. They could not lead because we could not teach them to hold office. They could not be honest because we would not allow them to testify. We would not allow them to marry. It was impossible to rape a slave because it was simply not a crime to rape an animal that could not possibly give or deny consent. The abuses over this 40 years continued. And then we fought the Civil War. And we changed the legalities, but we didn't change the minds of people. Because that bad thinking, that superiority continued. So after the Civil War, we have another 100 years of virtually the same caste system that we had thrown up before. It's called what was called Jim Crow. You can work around laws or just ignore them. And that's what was done. And every generation of Americans, every generation of Europeans from 1619 up through World War II suffered the same thinking, the same actions. And then Tom Brokaw's Greatest Generation comes along. I don't know what it means to be a greatest previous generation. But I know that that generation did perform well in 2 wars, one in Europe and one against Japan. But when those people came home, nothing happened with respect to the way we were thinking and acting towards the former slaves. The next generation finally started to open its eyes to the injustices of the previous 350 years. Bad thinking leads to bad actions, which leads the next generation to bad actions that they don't even understand what the thinking was based on. We cannot know ourselves until we know our history. And if we know our history well, we will not deem ourselves superior. But the generation that followed, the greatest generation, did a much better job of realizing the injustices. And the millennials that have come along now are far exceeding the baby boomers in this respect. And if we have a great generation, it is in our future, not in our past. Mr. Toastmaster.